Hello everybody, this is Dan Gordon. I'm one of the co-founders of MyWorkDrive, and I have Scott Miller on the call with me. And today we're going to be going through MyWorkDrive external B2B file sharing. So what is this? So typically customers, when they're doing external file sharing from their companies, would be sending out some sort of link type sharing and moving files into a database, or with MyWorkDrive, for example, transferring files to OneDrive. And we've had a numerous customers of ours that have asked us for some sort of functionality where they're able to invite guest users outside of their company to collaborate on files, but actually not have to move them off premises and have those folks be able to truly collaborate with internal users. And Microsoft actually has a process for this that works quite well, and it's documented here in our support article here that you'll find external guest folder sharing. You can search on our support site for B2B and you'll find it, and you'll see some documentation here on how this works. Let me just kind of give a quick brief overview here. So in this case, what we've got is our Windows file shares internally, we've got our Active Directory, we've got our MyWorkDrive server, and we've enabled Azure AD SAML authentication. So what we're essentially doing is we're creating an account internally on Active Directory, and that account actually is going to have a UPN suffix of that guest user's domain name in it. We're going to add them to a group that has permissions for the one share that we want to let them use. But that account's never actually going to be logged in interactively by that user. It's actually locked down specifically not to allow that, or removed from domain users, and is set to check a box to use a smart card, which you'll never be able to do, so that we can instead impersonate that user and show them their shares. And then what we'll also do is then create a user in Active Directory to be able to then essentially log into Active Directory as a guest user. That's a guest user to our Active Directory Azure AD. They will log in, they will get the SAML URL, and then they'll be able to see the shares. So we've got quite a bit of documentation here. We've actually even kind of put out what the manual process would look like. And there's still some steps that we'll need to perform manually up at the first part in terms of being able to create the groups, both in Active Directory for NTFS groups as well as in Azure AD for the groups over there. But we actually have a PowerShell script that'll automate creating the user both internally and externally, and we have the sample for that you can take a look at and edit. That's available on the support article, and you can download that here. So I'm actually going to go through these steps in real time, and you can see that they're all kind of screenshotted and shown here. So let's see if we can get this going. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to go onto a domain controller. So I have one here. Should be ready to go. You'll see that in this case, I've already got a OU that I'm going to put these users into. So this is an OU where this user that we're creating is going to be located. In addition to that, we also have our active Azure AD, and over in our Azure AD, we've actually created a group over here as well. So if I actually look at Azure AD and look for groups, we'll have one called MWD guest. So that user that we create with our PowerShell script will be added to both the internal group as well as this cloud-based group that lives within Azure AD. And then for our actual SAML app, so if I go to Azure AD and take a look at our SAML apps, we've got our MyWorkDrive already configured. That's one of our support articles. A lot of folks already do this already. You can set this to be required to log in to Azure AD SAML, or you can set it to not be required and just give out the URL for these guest users to directly sign in that way as well.
So let me ask a question, Dan. You've really got two tiers of security or three tiers of security. They can't log in because we're going to force them to be a smart card, which isn't a login. They don't have a smart card. We don't have smart card deployed on our domain, so they already can't log in. But further
Hmm.
than that, they're in a group. I'm sorry, they're in a on Active Directory. They're in that guest. So as long as I don't assign that to shares or give that permissions, I've given them no access anyway. And then further, over here in Azure AD, I put them in a secondary group, which again, I haven't given them any permissions to. So even really the only thing they can log into, they'll be able to log into is Azure AD, and then only to my WorkDrive, and then only to the things I've given them permission to. So they're
Yeah,
really
even
locked
even
out.
if you even if you went in and gave them access in Azure AD and put it in the MWD guest group, which has access to our SAML app that you've created, if they don't have NTFS permissions, when we impersonate them, we're just going to get a blank folder, right?
Yeah. So
So,
this is so even though we've set all these things up in various places, they still in essence have no permission. There's no real security risk here.
well, on top of that, in terms of, you could do all this, of course, just create an internal user, but then now you're managing password resets and two-factor authentication and all this other stuff for people that don't even belong to your organization. By putting them in this way, then all that stuff is managed within Azure AD because you're outsourcing that as your identity provider in this case. So you
Well,
can
and
even, you can,
the user self manages that, right? Because it's
right,
their
yeah.
account.
So you're not having to then maintain accounts for people outside of your organization. You'll see when we go through the process here that they'll need to identify themselves from put in a cell phone number and get a text message. So you're truly assured this is the person that you're sending the invite to. And this is all standard um, process that Microsoft has defined within that support article. And there's multiple ways to do this. We're doing it from the direction of we're creating them on the MyWorkDrive side in Active Directory and then pushing things over with our PowerShell script over to Azure AD. It could be done in reverse, and there's some documentation on that, creating them in Azure AD and then pulling down that information. We're
I
doing it
think,
from our side so that it's more extendable in the future because now we're going to start with Azure AD, but we could use other identity providers down the road as well.
and I think that's another important point is this is not this is just you've in essence taken a set of ingredients that Microsoft already has and you've made a recipe for how to use it to give shared access to guests in my work drive. This isn't something we invented or something that we're not hacking in essence Microsoft. This is a fully supported methodology for Microsoft. We're just showing you how to use it to solve this particular use
Yeah,
case.
with specifically with MyWorkDrive and then being able to lock that down. So
Right.
yeah, so to continue that, so we've got the Active Directory groups. Let's finish that up. So in this case, we've got the OU set up. We also have a MWF guest group that we've created as well. So if I do a search here, so there's our group. So we're going to create that user. We're going to put them in this MWF guest group. And then within the MyWorkDrive server itself, we'll have set that share to allow that guest group to have access, and then on the NTFS share as well. So if I go
So if
actually to
I'm
the server here, we'll take a look at that.
so if I'm a consultancy and I'm working with multiple different clients, I just would repeat this pattern and each client would get a different share in my work drive with a different group of users who's potentially in the same guest OU, but maybe even in different OUs if I want to differentiate it that way. But the key would be I'd make different groups and I'd grant my permissions to different shares and different folders based on, in essence, in my example, my my clients.
That's right. You could create a different share for every project that you want to manage. Down the road, we're going to be automating this as much as we possibly can to make it even simpler and not even have to use a PowerShell script. We'll see what kind of limitations we run into. We may even be able to permit only access to specific folders. That's going to be a lot more complicated in terms of being able to set the proper NTFS permissions. but we'll see what we can do there without having folks have to create multiple shares for each external group they want to work with, although it's quite easy to do that within MyWorkDrive. Even down to a folder level, you can do that in MyWorkDrive. So you can see here, here's the, this sample share. In this case, it's just locally on the MyWorkDrive server just for this test. You can see that, of course, this group has NTFS permissions. And then if I log into the admin panel, we'll see that we have it on there as well. So in this case, it's just this little local share. Of course, it would typically be an it would be UNC path. And you can see now we've given that that group. So if I were to create a local user, even in Active Directory, even that's not a guest, and it would just, it's the same process, right? Except the thing that we've done here basically is we've set all this up. Now we have the foundation, so we can very easily just run this script, add as many users as we want to it, just basically update our script to be able to do that.
So it continues to fit in our no duplicate management philosophy of you've set it up once, you've added your group, now you can do all of your management in Active Directory, or in this case with the PowerShell scripts that are linked, and you don't have duplicate administration.
Right. So here I've got the actual script that I've brought up here. You're going to be prompted for first name, last name, and email address as part of inviting a guest user to be able to access this share. We needed to tell the script, what NTFS group did you want to use? Where do you want to put these user accounts? It's nice to put them in a separate OU so it's easier to manage and disable them and find them. Put in whatever description you want on the accounts as well. Just put in your Azure AD domain that they're going to be pushed to. And then what group do you want to put them in Azure AD? As you recall earlier, I showed that I took that MWD guest group and I made that allowed to be able to log into SAML, right, for our app. And then here's our specific app, right, all the way down to the login SAML path, so that if you wanted to, you can either require SAML for all users or just make it optional. In this case, we could allow it just to be optional, or we can turn it on for all users, even internal users. And as you step through the script, you'll see here, I'm going to go ahead and generate a password just to have it on there. But as I mentioned earlier, this user will never actually be able to log in, because we're going to go, when we go through and step through this, if you can look through the script here, you'll see that we're setting smart card login required to true. And this is the methodology that Microsoft provides in their article for that. So I think we've got all the pieces here. Let's see if we can go ahead and run this. All right, so I'm running the PowerShell here. You can see that I've got, a newer version of PowerShell. You can't run this on 2012 R2 with like PowerShell 4. You need to have at least 5, I believe, or maybe even 5.1. So I've upgraded that. I'm actually just running this on the domain controller in this case. So I'm now going to go ahead and run the script. So I've got a user ready to go. So now it already created the user. Now I'm going to log into my Azure AD domain here. And it's going to go ahead and create it over there. And then it'll send the invite to the user as well, which I'll show that in a second. Okay, great. So there's actually a special procedure within that Microsoft now supports. Actually, it's for inviting specifically Azure AD users. as a guest users to your active Azure AD domain. So at this point, I should be able to go in here, check my mail. I can see I'm logged in here to the demo account. This is what the user on the other side will get. So they now get this option to be, you're basically inviting them into your Azure AD as a guest user. I'll click here to get started. It's going to make sure that I log in, and it will actually, in some cases, even if you haven't already verified, it'll actually ask me for my phone number and send me a text as well to truly make sure that this is the right person. You can see there's asking for a little more information here. I'm going to go ahead and put a phone number in here and then have it send me a text message. And there you go. I'm actually now been granted access to that folder. This is the same one that we set up earlier in all the steps that we did before. Pretty cool.
And I'm a regular user with whatever level of NTFS permissions you gave me to this share. So maybe I can read, maybe I can write, maybe I can modify, but you control that. You didn't lose control of that when you set this up in any way.
Yeah, and let's go back just to verify here. So let's just see where this user lives. Let's just go check it out here. So if I go back here to Azure AD, look at users, look for guest users. There we go. So there's our guest user that we just created. That's the demo account. And let's see what groups they're a member of, right? Group memberships, 1, and that's actually that group that we created. The MWD guest group, that's cloud-based group, so we're allowed to be able to add that user to that group. And then if we go back to our domain controller, we should see that that user also exists over there as well.
And if I no longer want this person to have access, just like an employee, just like an account I created, I just delete it.
Exactly. You can delete it.
Deactivate
you can just terminate
it,
deactivate it, whatever you want to do. Now that this user exists, if you have some other shares that you want to add them to, you can add them to that as well, individually or by NTFS group.
And I don't have to re-invite them. If I add a new share, if I split the project, or I do a second project with this similar group of people that I'm sharing with, I can just add their user to that, the same way as I would an employee or a staff member, a regular domain user. Just add them in NTFS and they get access to it. I don't have to re-invite them or anything.
Right. So you still have to add them to NTFS. You still have to add them in MyWorkDrive as an additional security measure to make sure you really wanted them to be able to see that share. But they already exist from that perspective, and you don't have to manage and maintain them and worry about any of that stuff in terms of passwords or any of that. So you can see that part of that process is that it sent out this email and invited them. Now this here can be updated to, you can actually even customize the message if you want. So if you wanted to, you could put in, like on the top here, remember we put in our URL. So we could make that, part of that welcome message. We could put in that URL in the message and customize that. That's stuff that we'll be doing as we provide more integration for this right within the admin panel. But you can do that right within this sample login script here that we created in PowerShell. You can make it too.
In essence, you can make it very clear that you're the one who invited them. This is something that you probably notified them to expect.
Make a bookmark for this URL for the future when you need to access, this company share to be able to work on files. Because otherwise, they're just going to have this invite, and then they're going to. It'll still work. They can keep going back and clicking the invite, but it might be nice to send them the URL to bookmark as well.
Right. Yeah. Well, my thing, the line of thinking there was you can be more specific about the organization, what it is, why they're getting it. It doesn't just look like some spam,
random Microsoft thing that's come along. Yeah, you may even want to send out a separate email for that from your company as well to kind of go along with this.
It really is pretty easy and pretty straightforward, and it's I guess the what makes it possible now is all the work Microsoft has done to create the guest user environment and the tools that they've given to create a PowerShell that'll let you automate this process as opposed to creating it all by hand.
Yeah, and they've even added some capabilities within Azure AD that you can even add other domains, such as you can add Google into your Azure AD. So if people have Google accounts, then even they could actually authenticate using their Google accounts if you want. That's all something that you can just keep extending this. So then it wouldn't even need a Microsoft account in that case, even though it's flowing through Azure AD.
But at this point today, using this article, you could do this right now. Any MyWorkDrive client can do this right now using this process.
Right, and even if the user doesn't, as part of this invitation process, if most people already have Microsoft accounts already, where they're actually using Office 365, so they would log in with that. If they don't have an account, then they can create one on the fly. So that's all part of the process.
Very clean.
Great. Thanks, everybody.